So, this episode is about errors, and errors come up a lot in Go, and not everybody handles them quite equally well. Um, let's just take a look. Let's just bring up. Well, let's take any function really. So let's do our file IO. So we're gonna open a file. So file. Sorry, open. And we give it a name like we'll open our go.mod file. And we see that open returns an OS file and an error. So file error. Now you've got a red squiggly because you're not using these two, and a lot of people say, well, I don't really care about the error right now. We'll just do this. And we'll do whatever we want to with our file. We'll do file.read or IO util read all file into some data. So read all returns a byte stream or an error possibility. Well, I don't want to deal with the error right now. Okay. Great. Okay, so actually println could actually return an error as well. So a lot of things in Go wind up returning errors. And if you ignore the errors, like either you don't explicitly use the error here. So in this case, we've pretty much, every time we've used fumped or log or whatever, we've ignored the error. The other thing you can do is just use an underscore to say, hey, I know I'm going to get two values back. I just don't care about the error value. And in some cases, this is perfectly okay. I'm not saying that you have to manage the error all the time. I'm just saying that unless you have a really good reason to ignore the error, you should at least do something useful like logging the fact that you got an error. So let's take a look at implementing our own error. Well, actually, let's do this. Let's look at the useful thing that we should do with an error. So let's put error back in here. So what should we do if we get an error trying to open the file? So error equals nil. So if the error, does not equal nil, we should decide what we want to do at this point, and that could be failed to open file, and at least send the error out to the console to say, hey, we weren't able to open the file, and here's why. So let's do this. Let's create a file called modx. There's no such file, right? Okay. We may not want to exit the program entirely. We may be able to recover from the error, in which case we might, instead of using something like fatal, we might choose to say print f, hey, I opened the file, and then you recover from it down here. So for example, you say if file equals nil, and OS exit And when you're exiting a program and you want to indicate that there was an error of some kind, you return a non-zero value. So in this case, I'm saying, hey, try to open the file. If I can't open the file, log it, but we're not going to do anything right now. We're just going to go ahead and let the rest of the program recover as is. So go run. All right. How should you handle returning errors from your methods? So let's say you write a method like, let's call this function uppercase file contents. So this is a rather specious method that does one thing. Given a file, we uppercase its contents and we return it as a string, right? And then we can go ahead and open the file. And we are going to be good citizens, and we're going to check to see if the error is not equal to nil. And we're going to log the failure. But we don't just want to absorb the errors down here. We probably want to, on most of the methods you'll write that use functions that could return errors, you'll probably want to go ahead and return the error. And the error is always returned as the last return value. So down here we would return, the string and our error. I'm sorry. Down here we would return the string and the error that we received. And of course, here we would continue processing, right? So generally, that's what you want to do. You don't want to be in a situation where you're trying to debug a program, and as you're reading through the code, somebody just either ignores the error or squashes the error, and that's why everything's failing. And good error hygiene. And what I like to do when I get an error is I like to print out what it is. Let's go take a look at the open documentation again real quick. So it returns a file and an error. It will be a type of path error. So what if the function could return multiple types of errors? So some functions can return one kind of error or another kind of error depending on we could have we can check to see if error is, and so in the errors package there's the is function, and that takes the error that we got and the error that we want to check against, OS path error. Okay. So we can now handle the error so this will only run if it's an OS path error. So for example, if I wanted to say is UF, huh, can't use missing method. Oh, interesting. Anyway, long story short, we can check to see whether or not an error is a type of error. This can become important if we want to create our own errors. So let's talk a little bit about creating our own errors. So an error is a function. So if we want to create an error type, we would, so let's create type is my error. And this is a struct. And it's always I believe it's always pointer my error. So if we look at the error interface, it's just one error, which is just one method, which is the error method. Sorry, I'm a little bit out of it today. I had my booster yesterday, and I thought I was feeling pretty good this morning, but I've actually got actually feeling kind of flat. But if you haven't gotten vaccinated, please get vaccinated. Return my error. Now, we can, for example, with our error, get additional information like file name. So if we have our uppercase function, and this returns a string and an error. So we've got file error equals os.open. If error not equals nil, return and my error. So return empty string, returning two values, and so forth. So in this case, we return back my error, and we can say something like so something like that. So that might be more useful to the user of our library. Okay, and the last thing I want to cover, um, is recovering from panics. Well, actually, that's not quite the last thing I want to cover. No, that pretty much is. You can wrap it. You can also wrap an error using the $ W. So you can return. Oh, the ways you can create errors on the fly. Like I said, I'm kind of out of it this morning, but there are a couple of ways you can create new errors on the fly without having to create a struct or something like that for your error. You can use errors.new, and you can say can't handle file. All right. Well, it would be good to have the file name, right? So there's actually another way to do it, which is to use bumped errorf, unable to open so this will create a new error, and that error will have that error message. So that's what the user of that error or the receiver of that error will see. Um, let's actually implement this function real quick. IO read all, and so that returns data error. If error not equals nil, return and string to upper string data. Oh, need to pass the file. Okay. So there are some things in errors. If you're going to create an error variable, so if you want to return like an error that people can catch. Anyway, long story short, let's take a look at this. In this case, we get an unable to open error. We could get an error that says I couldn't read all the data. In some cases, though, you might have a standard error that so we could actually now create a func uppercase error. Yep. Um, and we could decide, hey, rather than that, I'd rather just return. Notice that I return pointers to errors. I don't return. And this doesn't implement the error, so error methods of func. All right. So how do we handle it down here? So if we call uppercase error, or sorry, if we call uppercase file, and we can unwrap this. Or we can do as. Yeah, we can check to see whether or not the error is a given type of error. And we can check, we can unwrap it to get the underlying error. All right, but actually you can't do it. I think I have to implement another method for that to work. Let me just check real quick. Errors, unwrap. Oh, I have to have an unwrap method, so I could have func u uppercase error unwrap. There, now I could unwrap my error and get the underlying error that caused the problem. So I can say original equals error. And then I can look at the original error. Okay. All right. I think that's enough error stuff, and you've seen enough error stuff to get confused. My big takeaway, but let's move on to panics real quick. So what's a panic? Panic is when Go decides, some implementer of some function Go decides, not only is it necessary to return an error, at this point we might just want to kill the program. So let's do an example of, and you'll see why I'm having to do this in a function in just a minute, or why I'm doing it in a function in just a minute. I don't have to, but so I'm going to call bad function, and bad function is going to create an array of things, sorry, a slice of things, or a slice of integers, and printf, and we're going to print v, we're going to put the 27th element of that slice. Okay, what's going to happen if I run that? We panicked. So at this point, Go said, hey, you're trying to reference beyond the bounds of a slice. So this is something that's so bad, we're just not even going to let you do it. In some cases, this wouldn't be, and so because it's so bad, we're just going to kill the program. In some cases, you don't want to do this. In some cases, what you want to do is you want to recover from this and handle it appropriately. Like imagine if every time you hit some panicking method or some panicking behavior, your web server crashed. The entire thing crashed. That would be bad, right? That's not the behavior you want. What you want is to say, hey, we had a panic and kill that request, but you don't want to bring down the entire server. So what we can do, if we know that this method might panic, and we specifically know that we can and want to recover from the panic, just because you can recover from a panic doesn't mean that you should. In some cases, having your application just crash is actually a good thing. So we want to defer a function, and this function is just going to log println we panicked, and then I'm going to call recover. And recover just gives us the contents of the call to panic. So let's do this. Printf. Okay. So now if we run this, we exited normally, right? So if I were to put this in a loop, right? We see that it ran it 3 times. It didn't just die. If I remove this defer, so it's commented out for now. If I remove it, it dies in the first attempt. Okay, so that is how we prevent defer panics from killing our program. Now, it could very well be that we need to panic at some point. So we might write an API at some point where we say, hey, going back to our uppercase method, and we try file error equals if error equals not equals nil. So if error is not equal to nil, we're going to go ahead and panic, and we're going to pass the error. We could do that. So in those cases, somebody using our library may say, hey, I do want to uppercase the file on my web server, but I don't want my web server to crash every time somebody puts in a bad file path. I want to recover from it. So I will go ahead and if I call your method, wrap it in a function that defers a recover. So the recover can't run within the context of the function, but it can run after the defer. And again, what's happening with the defer is this function exits, then the defers are run in a stack. So if I have another defer here, and let's go ahead and remove this. If we run this now, we see I'm deferring. I'm deferring is printed before the panic recover, right? Because the last function you defer is the first function run after the end of the function. Of course, if we have a defer right down here, oops, we don't see that output because this caused the panic, so we never got to the point where we deferred that function call. All right, so that covers, I think I'm going to redo the error handling one. It just did not go well. I'm just kind of off today. Anyway, that recovers basic error stuff. And recovering from panics. I think the recovering from panics I did pretty well, but and so that should be pretty straightforward. But the big takeaway from the error stuff is don't just silently pass off errors. Actually take the time to handle the error and do something useful, whether that's wrapping it in your own version of that error, or it's raising the error, or even panicking. In some cases might be the right approach, but don't just swallow the error and ignore it. All right, that's it for today. I have a conflict next week where I won't be doing the Tuesday, Thursday streams, but I will be back the week after that. All right, have a good one. Take care. Stay safe.